welcome to another awesome episode of the Candice and Elisa show. I cannot believe that we are on our final episode of season 2. And this season finale, for me, it's very personal because the story revolves around what happened to me during the past week. And that is about the Cape Town fires. So for those of you who do not know, recently Cape Town Table Mountain, which is a huge monument in South Africa, caught on fire, and the university burned down, UCT burned down, and a lot of national monuments and places that people grew up with. And the fires unfortunately ended up spreading all down the mountain. Arson was, like, some people were accusing that there were arsonists that had been involved in this, but the fires had spread actually into the city, the inner city where I stay. And there was just so much that came up for me because I was forced to evacuate my house very early in the morning and, have a go bag, and I was out of here and traffic and panic. And, it was also very interesting for me to observe as an observer, someone who was impacted both directly, where, I had to evacuate my apartment, but go just like 10 minutes away where it was Sea Point and people weren't necessarily directly impacted by the fires, and seeing how, wow, if things don't hit us directly, how we can actually be so oblivious to it. And I think another thing, before I hand over to you and your reflections, Elisa, was that they actually had to tweet. So the National Guard, or like at least our version of it, had to actually ask people to not walk their dogs up a mountain that was clearly on fire. And so to me, I was like, how absolutely self-absorbed and ignorant can you be to still want to take your daily mountain walk when the mountain is clearly alight? So it's been really interesting times. And I think, if anything, it's highlighted once more how uncertain the times we're living in are right now. And it was a very scary experience. And I want to know your reflections on it, Elisa.
I was freaked out because I was like, oh my God, my friend is and obviously I'm making it insular because I was thinking about you. But then when obviously you think about it as Cape Town being one of the most iconic cities in the world and all of the people that were affected, and you just go, man, this is awful. And you reflect on climate change, you reflect on what's triggering these things. Obviously, if there was arson, then that also is, what's the sentiment that's being brewed at the moment there, and why do people feel the need to do that? But certainly it just re-emphasized the unpredictability of the times and how nothing is set in stone. Here in the UK with COVID, everybody's getting vaccines and everything, but we don't know what those vaccines are going to do to any of us in 10 years time. We don't know if new strains are going to come out. India's burning with COVID. So it's really just one of those times where nothing is set in stone. And in life, nothing's ever set in stone, but more than ever, I think we're just having to take it a day at a time, and sometimes a few hours at a time, because we just don't know what the next thing's that's coming. So I think for me, it's more about, I'd like to learn more about how you felt when you had to leave and you realized that you could maybe not be coming back to your home because it could be all burned. What does that feel like?
Yeah, I think everything you said is so accurate, right? There is this idea that I think, as humanity, unfortunately, we are triggered by moments of pain when we just to understand basic things, such as nothing is set in stone, right? We live as though we're going to live forever. We act as though everything is secured and safe and we know what's going on. And then moments like this happen where you really are uncertain. You have no idea what's going to happen to your life. And you also don't know what is worth saving. And I think in those moments, you really do have to really cut things down. And I know for me, what ended up happening was, the previous day I knew Table Mountain was on fire, but I would have never thought that they'd start spreading into the city. And so I recall seeing it and being like, gosh, I really hope they contain it, because it was just getting bigger and bigger. But that morning I went to bed that evening. That morning, I remember I was really in a deep sleep, but then I heard the howling winds, and it was Cape Town's got some incredible winds, but this one was particularly it stood out in my mind for some reason. And I remembered the fire. So I was like, holy, and I literally in my bed, I was sleeping, and then I jumped up and I was like, if the winds have taken off and we haven't contained this fire, we're in trouble. And then my senses, and I started smelling like a small burn, but I didn't think anything of it. And I opened my curtains. And I think because I'm like so high up in my building, when I opened the curtains, all I saw literally in the clouds, or like at least like in the distance where I can usually see the water in the distance, just smoke everywhere. There was just smoke on the horizon, smoke, and it hadn't started to drop yet. So from my viewpoint, all I saw was myself being surrounded by smoke, but when I looked down, it hadn't started to drop as yet. So it was still in the atmosphere more. And I opened my window and it just like hurled in. And I was like, okay, this is bad. This is not good. And so I quickly went on to like news, and I realized that they had not contained the fire, and they were actually starting to evacuate the place like about 5 minutes away from me by car. And I was like, okay, the evacuation is definitely going to come here. Like, there's no doubt I'm not going to miss this. And so I had to really get into zone. And I called a friend of mine who lived like in Fresno. And I said, hey, would you mind if I came over? And she was very kind. And she said, yes. And I had to jump out of bed, brush my teeth, and throw the things that I needed into my suitcase. And I was out, And so I don't have a car in Cape Town. And I had to Uber. And so I got my Uber, and I remember I ordered, and ironically was an Uber driver I'd had a really big conversation with a while ago. And it was just so ironic. Like, we'd re-met at this time, and he was late, and he was just saying like the traffic was insane. The price surge was through the roof. It was just like, it was insane. And it was literally, it felt like, those movies where you always see like cars driving out of a city. Usually the city's like New York or something. You've seen this traffic jam and this chaos happening. That was literally what it was like. And I remember thinking and saying to the driver, I was like, I feel like I'm too numb to be like in shock. I'm like, whenever you see this happening in movies or in the news, you never think you're going to be a part of it, right? You never think I'm going to be like someday forced to evacuate my home and not go back. Because that was the reality. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to come back here. So I need to take what's important. And so leaving it was like a bitter, like, I don't want to say bittersweet, but I think for me, what I really cemented was that just having my life in that moment was enough for me. Right. Like, so I think that was the first like realization in that moment where I was like, I don't panic. Like, you and I are very similar in that way. When we're in chaos, we like get calm, we get central. We're like, okay, how do I get out of this? How am I going to survive this? Right. And so for me, I just remember just focusing on being alive, focusing on like, okay, even if everything burned down, I've got my life, I can figure it out, and I think that's the thought that I remember just repeating to myself, like, I'll figure it out. And even when I was at my friend's place, I just remember thinking, I will figure it out. It's replaceable. Things are always replaceable. And I think it brings us back to this time, right? Where COVID, as you said, in India is just ravaging India. And in South Africa, I'm living in a city whereby in many ways, yes, we're still very conscious of the fact that COVID is happening. But outside of that, it was very much the analogy I gave earlier about the fires. It doesn't directly impact us. Therefore, we allowed the privilege of living as though it's not a reality. It doesn't exist. And so I'm seeing the parallels of how people are choosing to just engage in life as they would, obviously with masks and so on. But because it's not our direct reality at the moment, how oblivious we are allowed to be at this time. So it's an interesting time in history to be alive, for sure. So I don't know, how are you feeling on a mental level? Like, how are you feeling mentally and like physically during this time?
Well, I think for me, it's just the matter of remaining open because, and I don't personally think it's that different to my career, because obviously a career in the arts, I still remember this director, Miranda July, saying, you are in the business of uncertainty. If you're not comfortable with it, you better get out of it. And I got that in university. And that was a big kind of thing that always stayed with me, because there's so much uncertainty in my career. The notion that, I did choose a field where I didn't know what country I was going to wake up to often. Sometimes I forgot what country I woke up in, what city I was, I had these things happen. So I've lived with a lot of unpredictability, and this just feels like an added layer to it. Now there are more things that are unpredictable. So in a very strange way for me, it hasn't felt as weird as probably it would to someone that has a very steady, stable kind of life, right? But I guess as you were thinking, I think that point about I just didn't think it would happen to me. I think it's a really interesting one because, you know, it brings back ideas of when you go in and cover a conflict zone, you're never thinking you're going to go and be the one that gets shot. You're never thinking you're going to be the one that gets kidnapped. You're the one that doesn't, right? And then if something does go wrong, you do have that reality check with yourself going like, oh, am I keeping going? But I think it's just important to always ask ourselves, you know, to make conscious choices and conscious decisions. If I do this and it doesn't work out as I envision, will it have been worth it? Right.
Mm.
And oftentimes I find that when we act completely on the whim and don't take that minimal pause, it can be like just a few seconds even, sometimes we can make the wrong choices. And you know, I think now more than ever, you know, that my goal this year is just listening to my gut more and really developing my intuition in a way that I haven't before. And I just feel that this time is like an open invitation by the universe for each of us to do that, because there are so many variables and so many potential directions that we could all be taking, that it's a perfect moment for us to just look inwards and make those conscious choices. I mean, one thing that I was going to ask you was, what was in your grab bag?
The most sparkly and like unsurvival related outfits I've ever seen. I was like, well, at least I know I value looking good.
At least you're ready for the roaring 20s of it all.
I was like, you know what, my life may be on fire, but I'm gonna go out looking like I'd just been invited to like a gala dinner, and it was so funny to me because I was like, okay, so at least I know what I value for sure. So it was the outfits I really liked the most, and it was obviously like important documents, my work stuff. But yeah, those were pretty much the things that I saved. Everything else I was like, you can burn. I can replace you. I don't know if I can replace the sparkly ass dress. It took me so long to get it, but
I mean, the irony of you having to leave your home because it could burn down, but then still be planning for a gala dinner.
Oh, for
that
sure.
Juxtaposition is like.
It's the beauty of the human existence, right? Like, it's like we can, in any given moment, we can phantom so many realities and still move through them. That's the irony, right? Like, you could be in a complete, there's so many people in the world who are going through their marriage is breaking apart, their home life's breaking apart, and still pitching up at work like nothing's happening. Yeah. And I think that is the beauty of the human reality, that we can live dual realities at once and still figure it out. And you said something about, you know, it's trusting your gut. And I'm so like, obviously you and I are on the same journey in that way, that we're really learning to trust ourselves. And for me, I found something so profound this weekend because I was hosting a conversation, and one of the conversations happened to be with Deepak Chopra. And so he was asked, like, if there was any book in the world, which one would he recommend? And he said something so deeply profound. I just thought, only Deepak Chopra would say something like this, so poetic, on the spot. And he said, The Human Body. He said, I wouldn't recommend a book. I'd tell you to study your body. He's like, because the infinite intelligence of the whole universe lays in your body. And he's like, it's incredible how many of us will seek outside of ourselves for everything that's already within. And I thought, I was like, if I could, I would have given the man a round of applause, a standing ovation, all of it. Because I just thought to myself, I don't know, at that moment he said that, the first example that came to my mind was our human bodies are designed for us to survive, right? And so when you're feeling like, when you're thirsty or parched, you don't question the fact that you're thirsty. You go to the tap, you pour water. A lot of it is subconscious. When you need the bathroom, you go to the bathroom. When our bodies are designed to keep us alive, keep us safe, allow us to know, like, this person is a little unsavory, you should probably cross the road. This is going to be good for you. This is not going to be good for you, right? But how often we still go against that? How often we override? How often we override a system that's designed for your greatest good? And so for me, I remember just thinking how deeply profound that little bit of insight was, that if we actually stopped looking to everyone else, everything else, every book out there, every sage, every person, and you just started looking within yourself and studying you, studying your heart, studying your reflexes, studying why you feel uneasy, because you know, all of us, the reason we feel uneasy with certain people is because they trigger something within us that is either stay away from this person because they're not that safe for you, or do this, right? And you need to learn how to read your own signals. And it's so incredible to me how we're willing to study our iPhones, how we're willing to study how a car works, all these things, but you refuse to sit with yourself long enough to say, wait a minute, why am I feeling uneasy about this? Why am I questioning this? Why am I not doing this? Why do I feel an urge to email this person? Why do I feel an urge to walk away from this? We don't do that. We override that system time and time again. And we live as though we're gonna, as we said earlier, like we're gonna live forever. When the truth is, life is completely uncertain. But the only certainty is your own internal truth and dialogue, right? And so for me, it's just like, in these uncertain times, the invitation you've given all of us and all of us should be engaging with is, now is the greatest time in history to start trusting that internal compass. The noise has slowed down. The hustle outside of you has slowed down. And so it's about looking at within and saying, am I doing this for survival? Am I doing this out of fear? Am I doing this because I don't think I'm good enough? Or am I doing this because it's the right thing for me, right? Absolutely. Because a lot of people will say things like, trust your feelings are facts. I'm like, feelings aren't facts. Feelings are indicators. So your feeling can tell you, I'm in love with this person, when the truth is you don't love that person. They're triggering a wounding within you that you don't love within yourself. And so now you're like, I need this person, right? They're like a drug. They trigger that unworthiness within you. You're like, I need them. And if you actually just listen to that fear and that panic that comes with that love, you'd be like, oh, I still feel wounding around this. Yeah. I just need to fix that. It doesn't mean it's that person, it's just me, right? Yeah. Or this doesn't feel right. Like, I don't know what it is. It seems good on the outside, but it doesn't feel right. And everyone's like, do it, you should do it. Like, you're going to be an idiot if you let this go. And you're like, yeah, I hear you, but I don't feel like it doesn't feel good, right? Like something we were discussing a little earlier. And it's like, you have to trust yourself above all else. And I think that is what the fire showed me. And that is like what 2020 and 2021 is showing me, that you got to trust yourself above all else.
And I mean, we can't blame ourselves when we do override necessarily, because, you know, this is a conversation I was having over the weekend as well, which was that progressive override begins when we are children. When you're a child and maybe you don't want to be hugged by someone, but your parent goes, no, this is uncle or friend or whatever, and then they sit you on top of them or something like that. It's fine. You have to give him a hug or something like this. And it's obviously progressively changing now. Obviously, this discourse is opening up. But, you know, how many times has it happened to both of us that we're working? I am hungry. I know that I'm hungry, but oh my God, just this one email. No, I just need to get this done. Suddenly you haven't had lunch. you haven't eaten. And so we override. And I think it's about consciously detecting where you override. There are some people that are very firm, and when they're hungry, they will eat, or else they'll be in a very bad mood or whatever. So, but everyone has something that they've had to learn to override. But if we remember children, I also remembered walking back down the street this week, and there was a little kid on her, I was being carried by her dad and I was behind. And I remember going like this, you know, sometimes I wave, sometimes I get a good response, sometimes I get nothing. But this one decided to go, and she just like closed her eyes and went like this. And it made me laugh, because I just went, children, if they're not in the mood, if they're not liking, they're not going to put a facade. They're just going to do what they feel is right. They're going to go, not interested, ma'am. I'm moving on from this. I'm just going to cocoon over here. How wonderful would it be if you're just in a conversation you don't have to be a part of, where you could just go, just one. And it's just remembering this childhood where you could set those boundaries, but they were taken away in a certain way, because you got to be polite and you got to be whatever. Oh, I'm not saying don't be diplomatic. I'm not saying tell everyone in the world to go screw themselves. No, I'm simply saying just detect where it's happening and make a conscious choice as to what your step forward is, right?
And you know what's crazy about that as well? It's like, it's a constant reminder of rewriting that kind of behavior that you used to doing, right? Like where you used to staying longer than you should, even though you know you should go home. The conversation's not that great. You don't even want to be there, but you're being polite and you're like, ah. And it's so funny, because when I started learning about boundaries, I was really adamant about it. I was like very you know, in it. And then I started, like, as we do, we started sliding back slowly, you know, and I ended up like in a situation, I think it was last week, where I was in the situation and I was just so exhausted. And I remember just sitting it out. And then eventually, like, a thought came to my mind, and it was like, you've got a house, you can go home. And I remember just thinking, why the hell have I been sitting through this? And then I was like, then eventually I was like, oh, guys, thank you so much, but I think I'm going to head home now. And everyone's like, but why? The same process that people will always have. But I was like, no, I think, like, I've reached my, quota of socialization, but you guys are great. Have a great time. I'm going to leave. And I left, and I remember getting home and I was like, you could have done this 2 hours ago. Why the hell did you put yourself through that? And I thought, oh, it's still a new habit. It's still taking form in my psyche, right? It hasn't become natural yet. So if I don't remind myself and I'm not very conscious of it, then it's very easy. Like you're saying, you can't be hard on yourself, but you just got to be conscious of it, that, okay, this is a new habit and it hasn't taken form yet. So I just need to shift it slightly,
Yeah. And I think as always, this is something we could chat about. And we do chat about outside of this recording for hours. Who are we fooling here? But guys, this is definitely a time of a lot of introspection. It's a space where we can actually make conscious choices. We have loved having this opportunity of speaking to you for the last season, 2 seasons now. We hope we have many in future where we get to communicate with you as well. Candice, I don't know if you have a final message as our wrap-up season.
Yes, it's always just to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who's watching and engaging and, speaking about us to people. I think it's always such a great thing to know people have value out of these conversations as much as we love having them. So we look forward to season 3 and seeing you guys again. So thank you so much. And remember your boundaries. Remember to listen to your gut. That's what I leave them with. Listen to your gut.
Yes. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Bye.